For anyone who's on the Zoom, maybe the assistant director of the MFA Writing Program. I have a couple quick announcements, kind of MFA specific events, and then I will be introducing our speaker this afternoon. So a few reminders tonight. We have our first student faculty happy hour of the semester, and David Ryan is going to be our faculty reader. Pizza's going to arrive at 6 in the Sloanham living room for our MFA writing community, and readings are going to start at 6:30. Between tomorrow and Friday, if any of you want to RSVP for Robin Schiff's Poetry Masterclass, which will be on October 10th, you can email me to be considered. And next week, we have Michelle T. visiting us on Tuesday and Wednesday as our nonfiction resident. She'll be giving a craft talk on Tuesday afternoon and a reading on Wednesday evening. Both are open to the public. The craft talk will be offered over Zoom as well. And her master class is going to be on Wednesday afternoon. It is currently full, but if any of you want to be added to the wait list, feel free to email me as well. And finally, please silence your cell phones or turn them off. And we'll also have a couple of Jee's books for sale after the talk, and those will be available via Venmo or cash. Okay. In the influential essay by poet Philip Metris titled From Reznikov to Public Enemy, he defines documentary poetics as, and bear with me, this is a little bit of a long quote, quote, arising from the idea that poetry is not a museum object to be observed from afar, but a dynamic medium that informs and is informed by the history of the moment. The documentary poem opposes the idea of a closed system, inviting, quote, the real life outside the poem, end quote, into it, while also offering readers a journey into the poem. Because of this double movement, documentary poems constantly court their own collapse, testing a poem's tensile boundaries in the face of what Wallace Stevens called the pressure of reality. Many poets and scholars have given their understanding of the movement of documentary poetics, but in many ways, the movement defies definition. Documentary poetics has no founder, no contested inception, and has come to be both international and multitudinous in its scope. This afternoon's guest speaker is Jee Leong Koh, Singaporean writer, editor, publisher, and activist based in New York City, who has spoken much on boundaries and the unbounded, both from a personal lens of migration and community to the intersections of form and fluidity within poetry. Koh received his MFA from Sarah Lawrence College in 2005, and is the author of numerous books of poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction, including Steep Tea, published by Carcanet, which was named a Best Book of the Year by UK's Financial Times and a finalist by Lambda Literary in the US, and a hybrid work of fiction, Snow at 5 p.m., translations of an insignificant Japanese poet, which won the Singapore Literature Prize. His latest book, Sample and Loop, Simple History of Singaporeans in America, which we will have for sale after the talk, and which he'll be sharing from today, is shortlisted for this year's Singapore Literature Prize in Creative Nonfiction and tells the story of the migration of Singaporeans to the United States of America, rendering the surprising trajectory of lived experience in musical verse. As the founder and organizer of the socially conscious transnational literary organization, Singapore Unbound, Koh started the biennial Singapore Literature Festival in New York City, the monthly Second Saturdays reading series, the literary press Gaudy Boy, and the Journal of Asian Writing and Art called Suspect. Please welcome Jee Leong Koh.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Maddie, and to the MFA Creative Writing Program for inviting me to come back And thanks everybody for being here this afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, great. Yes, I graduated, way back in 2005. Heimbold wasn't around. There was no such building. It was a field. We had Slonim House and a field. Here, I was taught by great instructors like Stephen Dobbins, and in my last semester, after she returned from her sabbatical by Marie Howe, my thesis advisor was Vijay Seshadri, and Jean Valentine visited, and Tom Lux visited, and I was fortunate enough to actually attend their workshops during their visits. So it's been a long time since I've been back, and I arrived a little earlier, so I was able to look around and discover that the spinning wheel is no longer around. It's been replaced by Henry's. And I don't know, I think it's just a nostalgic me speaking. I think the spinning wheel is a much more poetic name than Henry's. It certainly describes the world late at night when we were stumbling out of the spinning wheel. But the other place that is really a great favorite spot of mine was the Bronx River Park, the park along the Bronx River. So I went back, just before this to take another walk around the park and enjoyed, seeing the river and the little waterfall and the people there again. And I overheard this woman speaking very, very angrily into her phone, talking about some other woman who obviously had treated her very, very badly. And she was telling her listener on the phone that she would not tolerate such bad behavior anymore. In fact, she would actually sue this other person and take her to court and create trouble for her if this other person would, tangle with her again. And she expressed her determination by saying, "I've been ready. I've been ready. I've been ready." And I thought, wow, she could have said, "I'm ready." But no, she did not. She said, "I've been ready," because of course she means to say, I'm not ready now. I've been ready for a very long time. But because, I'm back at the old college, back where, I started as a poet, I was also listening to her words. And I realized that she was also taking pleasure in pronouncing the plosive B. "I've been ready," she was saying. "I'm ready?" That just does not cut it. It has to be, "I've been ready." All right, and that was exactly the poetry that she was articulating. I'm supposed to talk about documentary poetics today, and I really, really do feel like, what do you call that? Really, what do you call that when you are not somebody who is not really the real thing, all right? Because I came to documentary poetics or documentary poetry very, very late. But I do have two thoughts to share with you about documentary poetics this afternoon, and I will put them out in front of you immediately. Documentary poetics, that's the first thought. Documentary poetics is rooted in the lyric. And my second thought I would love to share with you more about is documentary poetics is not just about documents, but also about people, our living archives. And I think it'd be really boring to hear me talk continuously for 30 minutes, let alone 40 minutes. So instead of actually leaving the Q&A at the end, please feel free at any time during this so-called talk to raise your hand and ask me a question about anything that I've just said. Would you do that? Yeah, do you need to try? No. Oh, somebody is already doing it. Great, at the back, please. Oh, great. Didn't you just hear the introduction given so beautifully? Everybody tried to define it and failed. You're expecting me now to do what nobody can do? I cannot. I cannot. I mean, because every term we have for poetry has a history to it. So what are we trying to do when we're trying to define something? Are we trying to capture it in a particular moment in time? Can that contemporaneous definition gives the sense of the history behind the term and the changes that must inevitably occur when every practitioner practice that particular genre. I mean, even the lyric. We will all disagree, I'm sure, in this room what a lyric is, right? So even something that seems so blindingly obvious as a lyric, it will be subject, I think, to controversy and debate. But that's part of the fun, isn't it? That we all get to discuss it, that we all get to be a part of that discussion, and we can all remake it, so to speak, in our own image. We're like gods in some way. So I'm not going to fall into the trap of defining poetics, lest you will hold me to it at the end and say, you have not fulfilled your own definition. But those two thoughts I will share with you. Now, why do I think, firstly, that documentary poetics is rooted in the lyric is this? Well, first of all, of course, let's talk about how perhaps they do not seem to belong to the same genre. The lyric is deeply personal, introspective, whereas documentary poetics is supposed to be social and outward. Documentary poetics is supposed, from another point of view, documentary poetics could be dry as dust, whereas the lyric is musical and alive, right? So these are binaries that have been drawn up, and I really do not think these binaries are very helpful, right? Because as I said, from my own experience and from my own journey, that documentary poetics for me really came out of my own journey in the lyric. This is partly, I guess, a result of growing up in Singapore, because when I grew up in Singapore, there wasn't very much poetry around. There were not many poets, local poets that I really knew or read. We were colonized by the British. We read British poetry. We read Wordsworth's, what is it? I wander lonely as a cloud, daffodils, right? That infamous colonial poem that all forced, who lived in the British colony to memorize and to recite to prove, that we are cultivated. And so it became a great task in the first place to try to actually find someone who is a local poet, who was also writing the kind of poetry that I enjoy, I identify with, that works for me, that brings out some emotion in me. There were older poets, certainly I knew, but they did not kind of work for me. I needed somebody closer to my age. And before I go, I'm going to read a little poem from my book, Steep Tea, just to give you a sense of what this post-colonial dilemma, I would call it, feels like. This poem is called Attribution. You know the Irish poet Evan Boland? Yeah, great Irish poet. You must read her. She passed away just a few years ago. In her poem called, well, the Irish too were, of course, also colonized by the British. In her poem called The Mother Tongue, she wrote this: I speak with the forked tongue of colony. Attribution. My grandfather said life was better under the British. He was a man who begrudged his words, but he did say this: I was born after the British left an alphabet in my house, the same book they left in school. I was good in English. I was the only one in class who knew bedridden does not mean lazy. I was so good in English, they sent me to England, where I proved my grandfather right. Until I was almost sent down for plagiarism I knew was wrong and did not know was wrong, because where I came from, everyone plagiarized. I learned to attribute everything I wrote. It is not easy. Sometimes I cannot find out who first wrote the words I wrote. Sometimes I think I wrote the words I wrote with such delight. Often the words I write have confusing beginnings, and none can tell what belongs to the British, my grandfather, or me. Well, what do you do when you cannot find models around you, whether it is for your sexual life or for your poetic life? You migrate. And that's exactly what I did. I moved from Singapore to New York to come and join this program. So this place was really for me a very soft landing, right? To actually landed up here, all right, and to be reading and writing poetry for 2 years was just a dream, really. But even before coming here, I was kind of aware that, there are certain ideas that Americans have of Singapore, such as. Anybody raise your hand and tell me what kind of ideas you have of Singapore? Rich. I'm going to address that in a moment because I think I know where that source of that idea comes from. Anyone else? Really good food, yes, very much so. Repressive, yeah, have you heard of that? A government that's authoritarian. Yep, yep, yep. Absolutely. People are kind of like, working far too hard. They do not know how to play. Poor work-life balance, as they call it nowadays. So I had to read this poem because it has an epigraph and it does speak against a poet that I'm sure is well beloved in this audience. I do love her work. But there was one poem which I read. I thought, I'm not sure I really, really like this one. This is Mary Oliver's poem from, the epigraph is from Mary Oliver's poem called Singapore. You would not call any poem by the name of a country, would you? How would you feel if I'm Singaporean or a poem called United States of America? Oh, God, well, sorry, I mustn't rant. She wrote in Singapore, in a woman's rest room, one compartment stood open. A woman knelt there washing something in the white bowl. My poem. Ashtrays as big as hubcaps. The woman scrubbed the big ashtrays with a blue rag. She was my mother. Her hands were not moving like a river. Her dark hair was not like the wing of a bird. It was wispy. When she smiled at you, she was not feeling embarrassed. The toilet bowl was a handy place to wash the big ashtrays, but she guessed the work argued with your wobbly stomach. You flew home and put her in a poem called Singapore. I don't doubt for a moment that she loves her life, you wrote. I want her to rise up from the slob and fly down to the river. She becomes for you and your American fans a picture of the light that can shine out of a life, meaning a saint. And the picture is completed roundly with trees and birds. She buzzed home and said nothing, for you were forgotten in her rush to stick the laundry out of the windows to dry. She remembered you later, the night as humid as always. She had nice stockings on, or else she could have knelt in my place. She must have troubles of her own. We all do, she said, with a resentful condescension of the poor. Thanks. Yep, true. Not a true story because she did not email Oliver, but a true story in the sense that that's the kind of work that my mother had to do to bring us up. One of the many jobs that she had. So I moved to New York and came to Sarah Lawrence, and the teachers that I just mentioned really, really changed my ideas about poetry. And I wanted them to change my ideas because I didn't want to remain stuck in only British ideas of what poetry can be. New York, America did broaden my point of view about what poetry can be. I'm going to read you another poem now, and this poem is where I think the documentary starts to creep in. It is from my collection called Inspector, Inspector that just came out 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. And I started writing these sonnets in response to a sex diary that I kept after I came to New York City and came out as a gay man. You know, boys just want to have fun, right? So at first, of course, they were notches on the bedpost, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. And then afterwards, it became like, oh, I better keep track because if I get ill, I know who to tell, right? If somebody infected me, I might infect someone. I better keep note of all these things. But I'm well, thank you. I hope they are well too. But I started writing these poems in response to these diary entries. And diaries, of course, are a form of documentation. Yes, self-documentation, but documentation, isn't it? And the language in diaries are so personal, but also so honest. And written in shorthand because we know what we're talking about, isn't it? That they provide almost like the most wonderful writing prompts for my own writing. So I'm just going to read you one. And pardon me, the language is rather explicit. You can put your fingers into your ears if you wish. Andy, April 7, 2007, Saturday, met at Splash. That's the other thing, you know? I mean, this is documentary. Anybody still knows where the Splash Gay Club was? Chelsea, 18th Street, between 6th and 7th Avenue. It's no longer there. So it's so important to me to document this. Yeah, I'll read this one. Came back to my place, mutual jerk off after I sucked him. He does not suck or allow himself to be fucked. Likes cuddling in bed. He would not accept in any part of him, neither his mouth, nor ass, nor his ears, any protruding part belonging to a man, not the cock, neither finger, toe, nor tongue, as if, smooth as a pebble washed by the sea, he was inviolable too, like the seaside stone, as if to be smooth was to be unbroken on any and all sides, round as infinity. But he would allow his whole to be held, the whole in a part or the part of a whole, by the hand of a body or the body of a hand, and taken up by a boyish choice and glee, aimed with the slant of an eye, and flung, a planet skipping into the ether of the sea. Thank you. Watching my time here, and this is probably a good time perhaps to show the screen because I also, after coming to New York City, what I discovered was not just great poetry teachers and friends. I also discovered Singaporean creatives who too, like me, have escaped from Singapore to try to actually develop a creative career here in New York City. Not just writers, but also playwrights, also translators, also ceramicists, visual artists of all kinds. And it's really with them that I began to form this New York-based literary nonprofit called Singapore Unbound. It all started actually with a festival, a literary festival that we organized way back in 2014 when we brought 14 Singaporean writers over to New York City to present their work. And it was very successful. Many people turned out for it, both Singaporeans and non-Singaporeans. But after that first festival, there was a kind of naggy dissatisfaction in me because really I do not want to be a salesperson. I do not want to be a marketer promoting Singaporean literature to the United States. I was much more interested in actually fostering conversation and dialogue. So in the next festival, in 2016, we brought together both Singaporean and American authors and audiences for conversations around certain social topics. And that evolved and expanded. So the festival before this one, in 2020, what is this, 22, we actually brought together Caribbean American as well as Singaporean, Southeast Asian writers because both places are, of course, kind of archipelagos. So we thought one archipelago can actually speak to one another very well. So that's what we have been doing by organizing events such as this one. Excuse me while I thought, it'll make more sense to you if I actually show you our website so that you can actually see it as I describe it for you. This is Singapore Unbound. Where is I'm half blind, as you can see. Okay, good. So what we are a transnational literary organization based in New York City, and what we do is that we envision. Our goal is to envision and work for a creative and fulfilling life for everyone through the arts and activism. Creative, of course, because we are writers, but we are also artists, and we do believe that we are all capable of creativity, not just your professionals, but everyone. And then fulfilling, of course, because what's the point of being creative if you're not given the means, the resources to exercise your creativity and to get the rewards of it? In other words, to actually lead a fulfilling life. So that's what I think of as our socialist credentials there. Because what does Marx say about capitalism? It is the thief of time, right? Because it makes us do all the things we don't want to do, earn a living, so that we don't have time really for the things we want to do. There's a better way. There is a better way. Anyway, so we have events. So basically, we do two things. We organize events, right, such as the Literary Festival that's coming up. I hope everybody has received a postcard of the 6th Literary Festival in New York City. This year, the theme is Living Adaptations, and we're focusing on writing for the stage and for the screen. So we have a keynote by a really wonderful Singaporean artistic director of a major theater company coming to talk about his transformation of Euripides' play, The Trojan Woman, into a modern opera based on the Korean operatic form of pansori and based on K-pop. Right? So he completely modernized it, but it's such an important message because, as you know, The Trojan Woman is about women and war, right? How do women survive in wartime? And then we also have a film premiere. The film director and writer, He Shu-ming, will also be here, right, to talk about the film, which is about a Singaporean widow who goes to Seoul, Korea, on her own and gets into all kinds of misadventures. So it's a comedy and it's really quite wonderful. And the next day, because it's a 2-day affair, we have a series of panels on multilingual existences, as well as adapting classics for the stage and for the screen, and film editing as well. And the whole festival will climax in a stage reading of a new opera called Sisters of the Storm that reinterprets Shakespeare's King Lear with an all-Asian, all-women cast. So I do hope you will actually come out to the city over the weekend of October 19th and 20th to join us. The event is all free. We've always kept all the events free. Feel free to make a donation, but it's free. So please come and enjoy the events that we are putting up for you. And then in between these festivals, we actually have a monthly reading series as well that's held in various homes around New York City. So that's really wonderful. People actually open up their homes to us. We have a potluck, an open mic. It's open to everyone to come and actually read their work. And then also we have some fantastic published authors to come and read to us as well. Now, besides events, we are also publishers. So we actually started a small press called Gaudy Boy. All right, it's taken from a Singaporean poet's poem called Gaudy Turnout. I'll tell you the story afterwards if you like to hear it. And Gaudy Boy is a small press that publishes Asian voices from across the world. So this is our book that's forthcoming. It's a short story collection called The Way You Want to Be Loved by the South Asian, in particular Assamese writer, Aruni Kashyap. We also run annual Boy Poetry Book Prize. And this was last year's winner, so it was published only this year in April. It's called Interrogation Records by Jee Sophronius. And believe it or not, it is a work of poetry. Jee is originally from Jakarta in Indonesia, so he went back home to actually research the archives on the massacres of the communists and Chinese in Indonesia in 1965. And he wrote about it very, very beautifully. Yeah. But besides, fiction and poetry, we also publish, some wonderful anthologies. Let me show you some. As you can see, the second one on the right, from the left, is called Amana. It's an anthology of translated women's writing from Kazakhstan. Right? We're very proud to bring this out because, so little is known of Kazakhstani writing, let alone the women writing there. So we really love to platform them. And then the one on the extreme right is a collection of witness writings from Myanmar, both poetry as well as prose. And then further down, on the extreme right, in blue, is Ulirat. That's an anthology of translated stories from the Philippines. Yeah, so we really want to, instead of just replicating what other presses, especially the major presses, are doing, we just want to do something different. We want to fill the gaps. We want, this Republic of Letters. Do they still use such a term? The Republic of Letters? It feels old-fashioned. We want to, diversify, right? Pluralize the Republic of Letters. So when we talk about the Republic of Letters, we're not just talking about Western writers. Yeah. So this is our press. But besides, we also publish an online journal. As you can see, we publish both art as well as writing by Asian authors too from across the world, from America as well as from elsewhere. Yeah, stories, poetry, as well as essays. Yeah, so these are the activities, basically the two big group of activities we do. We organize events and we publish. And it has really led me to work very closely with Singaporeans as well as South Asians as well as Asians in New York City, and they have actually become very much a community for me. Now, going back to poetry, and what I said was my second thought that I wanted to share with you, that documentary poetry for me, sure, you can actually go to the documents, you can go to the archives, right? Go to the collections and see what is actually hidden, made invisible, erased, and try to rescue it in some way. But there are also walking archives among us. All right, people are actually the living archives of our time. And it's so interesting to me to actually go up to someone and ask them about their life story. And if they're willing to share and willing to, share a story with me so that I can write about it, and that's really a true privilege. And I believe, again, this is the link with lyric poetry, because in a lyric, it's not just musical. A lyrical poem is always relational as well. The speaker is always speaking to someone. And so I think I brought this kind of a relational poetics too into my documentary poetry work. So for, let me just go back to this for a moment and show you the book that I'm going to be reading from, which is Sample and Loop. Okay, I'll just leave it up there for a moment. So Sample and Loop is really a collection of poems based on interviews that I conducted with different Singaporeans living in America, not just New York, but America. And how did this project actually begin? It began in a very strange way. A friend, much older friend, she is a retired nurse from Sloan Kettering, and she was a nurse for the top brain surgeon of the country. So she was very formidable. I call her Linda, because she wants her pseudonym to be used for her. So Linda came to me, or rather, we had brunch, and she said, I'm going to tell you my life story because I have a very exciting life story. I want you to write about it. I said, Linda, I'm not a narrative writer. I don't know how to write fiction. I do not know how to write stories. I'm a lyrical poet. I only write about myself. And she would have none of it, of course. So She strong-armed me into these series of meetings, series of brunches and dinners, really, to talk to me. And I think finally, I think that's really what she wanted. She wanted to have someone to tell her story to. And I was busy taking notes, during those meetings, and I actually wrote up her poem, and her poem is now the very last poem and the longest poem of this collection, and it's titled "The Dying Nurse" because she is dying of breast cancer. Yeah, but there's more to her story than that. And so, because she kind of kick-started me in that direction, I decided to look around me to my friends and say, right, why did you move away from Singapore? Why did you come to America instead of actually, somewhere else? And a very dear friend of mine called Hong Ling Wee, her real name, who is a ceramicist, told me her story. And I'd like to read her poem for you now. And it's kind of appropriate to read it today, I guess, because 9/11 wasn't so long ago. The Ceramicist by Hong Ling Wee, who arrived in 1992, New York City. On a NASA scholarship to map the world, she walked into a workshop on a whim to throw a lump of clay on a wheel and feel a foggy, quiet, pink, revolving world evolve into an object of the mind, under the body's pressure, slight and sure, and afterwards surrender to the fire, not that of fire, but that of accident, for a ceramic rocket fallen back to Earth. And this she did for many years, living on little, explaining less, until she was surrounded by the fuselage. When the towers gashed vermilion and buckled, she was alone at home in Union Square. The noise expanded as it dribbled off to meet its echo, second detonation worse than the first report, inciting half-buried images of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In a foreign mood, she heard the phone ring, and a female voice, acclimatized but recognizable as Singaporean, asked for Wee Hong Ling. She never tires of telling this story, how the consulate located her and every Singaporean within an hour of disaster, when a black hole opened but was avoided because a star had called, a star called home. She never tires of telling this story, which I now tell you in my own fanciful way. Each iteration also explanation, the how developing into the why her pitchers, bowls, vases levitate. Thank you. So after interviewing, Hong Ling and friends around me, I ran out of friends. I have a lot of friends, but I ran out of friends. So friends began to introduce their friends to me, who are willing to actually talk to me. And that was when COVID hit, right, back in 2020. And so I actually conducted an interview on Zoom with Lashmi Ganapathy, who is a pediatrician working in Boston. And that was also wonderful. We could not meet face to face, but even over Zoom, perhaps because of the COVID situation, we felt that has really brought us very close together. And then, of course, there are very famous Singaporeans that I have no whisker of a chance to interview, such as our dear friend, the author of Crazy Rich Asian, right? Kevin Kwan. So what I did was to actually go online and actually look up all the interviews that he has done, right? And I thought, okay, maybe I can make a poem out of that. Because he was actually very, very frank and open about his life in Singapore and the reason why the family moved to Houston. So I wrote a poem about him too, which I'm going to read to you. It's a shorter one, and it's really, really based on his online interviews that I read. This is the author for Kevin Kwan, who moved to Houston, Texas at the age of 11. No fences, cool. No sentry boxes, cool. The driveway stripes, the handkerchief neat lawns, like in the movies, Home Alone or something. He was not so hot about no maids. Lunchbox he had to pack himself and find his way not only to, but through Clear Lake High School, the normal life his father engineered, far away from hereditary privilege. Who would anticipate the terminus, the cancer in the family that struck by lottery and made him drop New York for an uncertain term by his father's bed? There, they turned over still bright memories of Singapore, the gate that always squeaked, the taste of Newton wonton mee, the click of mahjong tiles, the garden birthday parties, and shared a joke or else a thought, a word or three, like Crazy Rich Asians. And yet, another privilege, the clean white pillow grew hot under father, and he flipped it for a cool offertory to the head. I know he did. Last year, I did the same. Thank you. So I want to read that poem to you because it's another demonstration, I think, of how interlinked the documentary is with the lyric. Because even if you're looking at documents, you are the one doing it, right? And you're going to be the one seeing it for yourself and picking out things that you think is important. And certainly when I was interviewing these people, I was selecting because I wasn't recording them, I was just taking notes. And that was very deliberate because I really wanted to be already selecting the details that would go into the poem as I actually take notes by longhand. Just as, painters sometimes paint from photographs instead of from nature directly, because a photograph has already condensed some of the details that would actually go into the painting. So that was what I did. And so because, I was doing that and listening to them and writing out the notes, I knew there was going to be a lot of me in the poem too. The lyrical will intrude into the documentary, no matter how hard I try to keep it out. So instead of trying to keep it out, I kept it in and made it personal, because it is personal, right? The passing of fathers. How can I listen, or read an interview by Kevin Kwan about how he cared for his father when his father was dying of cancer and not think of my own father, all right, who actually died of COPD. So I would definitely, promote this idea, I guess, that, there's no such binary really between the documentary and the lyrical. Instead, they're very, very much entangled and very enmeshed with one another. I'm going to just read one. Any questions so far? By the way, I've been talking away. You have allowed me to talk away. Thank you. Or would you like to leave the questions to the end? Yeah? Maybe at the end? Okay. All right. So I'll get on very quickly to my ending, and then we can actually have a proper conversation and discussion. I just want to say that, I am so grateful to this place, to Sarah Lawrence, who are actually getting me ready, all right, for the world, ready to be a poet. I'm recalling now the lady on the phone, isn't it? I've been ready. And certainly, I am sure, your teachers, your fellow writers, the place itself, the program itself, right, would get you ready to write those poems that only you can write. So I'm going to end off by reading this last poem, which is called To a Young Poet. I'm not trying to give anybody advice. I'm really speaking to the younger me. This is advice I wish somebody had given me when I was actually younger, if I can find it. And I will end with this. To a young poet, quit the country soon as you can, before you're set on a career path or marrying the home ownership scheme. Pay no heed to the village elders. They are secretly ashamed that they did not leave. Quit the country, but do not shake the dust off your feet against it. Leave instead with a secret smile for all that leaving has to teach you. Learn what it is to be welcomed, for the coin in your purse, for strong hips in pushing a cart uphill, a firm voice in a good cause. When welcome wears off, as it will, learn to leave again, this time by the sea. Be always on your way, and on arrival, sleep with anyone who asks. You never know what gift they may have for you in the morning. You will discover suddenly, or over the course of a winter night, what gift you have for them. Always kiss goodbye on the lips. There will be seasons of great loneliness. You cannot outrun it. So sit and survey the thunderless desert. In every town, pick up the local accent and blend it into yours, already impure, as a secret ingredient is fused into the top note of a perfume. Hearing you, the diviner will wonder where you are from. Drink deep of that wonderment. Do not betray it. After you leave a good tip for the barkeep, climb to your narrow room and write whatever you wish. Your flowers will grace the sweaty brows of the buffalo. Your politics will smell of perfume. If you write about the old country, you will write about a lover who leaves your side in the night to stand by the window and look up at the crescent moon. Thank you. Thanks very much. Oh, okay. There's a question behind too. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, oh, thanks for that prompt to tell the story. There was, after much searching, there was a Singaporean poet that I grew very fond of, and he was kind of, he died, before I could get to know him. His name is Arthur Yap, and he was a terrific poet. But he went abroad for 1 year to do his master's in linguistics in Leeds, UK. And he was a gay man. He was out cruising, and he saw this boy with all the makeup in some doorway. And he wrote a poem about him called Gaudy Turnout. And he described him as Gaudy Boy. So that's why we borrowed the name, because we thought, we wanted, the name to stand for something that is diasporic, that is born out of our wanderings, our exiles, whether they are self-imposed or other imposed. And we thought that that is a name that would stand for that, signify that, and also, it's just cute. Because Gaudy, I don't know whether you know, it's so British. You know what a Gaudy is in college, in British universities? They're like parties, basically. Yeah, a Gaudy is a party, a fiesta. So, so we want people to have fun. We want people to really enjoy our books, to really be blown away by them, but we also really enjoy them because they are good writing. So look out for them. Thanks for that question. Yeah, Maggie? Mm, yeah, yeah. Oh, that's such a great question, isn't it? Because we're talking a little bit about this, right, just before the talk, about how, it's so easy to keep writing and reading while in a program like this, right? We're all wondering, are we going to keep doing this afterwards, when we do not have, the compulsions of classes and teachers' disapproval, when we are kind of left on our own. And it's so important because, to have a community is really very motivating. And that's how we can actually keep pursuing, this vocation of ours, of being poets, writers, whatever. But so one place, of course, is to try to find a community here, right, in this place, because you would know each other's work, you would have interacted with one another, and I do hope that everybody here can find your community. But sometimes that may not be possible for all kinds of reasons, and you might graduate to find your community outside. For me, the key identifier was, being Singaporean. So we naturally drew to us Singaporeans. There are actually a number of Singaporean poets who graduate from this program. Just talking about them, and we know of at least 3. And they one by one have actually gotten in touch with me, and they came to Second Saturdays, our reading series. They read their work at the open mic. They submitted their work to us. So, they found us because of that connection. But not everybody in the team is Singaporean. We have Asian Americans, we have Malaysians on the team. We're quite, people are all over the place. So what connect then this international team? I think it is about literature, and it is about the arts, and it is about wanting to put out, voices that have been minoritized, to amplify them, whether they be women, all right, women writers in some countries are really very much ignored, or whether they are LGBTQ or queer writers who are not able to publish their work the way they want. Yeah, so I think that is really what keeps us going. So I think you got to find, really the core thing, that would actually join up your little band, if I may call it that, because that would be what would keep you going. I guess the other thing is that I would never have dared to set up a press because I have no industry experience, if not for my managing editor, Kimberly Lim, who actually did work for a New York publishing house called, Skyhorse. So she really had industry, experience. So in order to do something as big as putting up a press, of course we could have stumbled along and, groped and found our way, but that would have been very, very inefficient and probably very costly. So it was a real boon to us to have found somebody with the right set of skills who also believe in the mission to actually join us. And in order to do so, how did we meet? I was tabling at the Brooklyn Book Festival under Singapore Unbound, very lonely. I was the only person sitting there trying to sell some books. And then Kimberly, who has just graduated from the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, just arrived in New York City to do her first job, being an editor at this publishing company. She said to me, afterwards, I saw that name, Singapore Unbound. I thought, which Brooklyn hipster is that who's actually making you Singapore name? And then when she came up to me, came up to the table and found it was me, of course we bonded over that. So the lesson for me there is you have to put yourself out there, right? Because if you don't keep going to those events, to the festival and talk to people, then it'll be very, very difficult to find some like-minded fellow traveler. Yes? Okay, yeah. Yes, we will be. We're very proud. We grew from having one title to sell and display to over 30 now. So yeah, slowly, because we are an all-volunteer run press. I mean, I have a teaching job. I actually teach in a private school on the Upper East Side, full-time job. I have another full-time job. I write. And this is my third full-time job. Well, fourth. Because the third is running Singapore Unbound. My fourth full-time job, of course, as a publisher, right? And Kim is also a freelance editor. So we all have full-time jobs, so we're doing this, in our free time. But, it's amazing what you can do, right, when you put your mind to it. So we have been, for the last few years, able to put out 4 titles a year. So now we have a list of 30 titles that we are very proud of because we deliberately make the decision to publish very few so we can do them, with great quality. And then we can also publish work that we fully believe in and can stand behind. So we're very, very selective about what we publish. Yeah, but that's really worked for us. And then we think it's fine to actually grow our list slowly. And it's really a delight to table at the Brooklyn Book Festival and have people coming back to us and says, I came, to see you last year and bought your book. What new book do you have? I mean, that really makes our day. Right. If not, thanks so much for listening. Really appreciate your being here.